13 minutes. That's how long a space capsule takes to cross the atmosphere on re-entry. 13 minutes where the heat shield reaches 2,700 degrees Celsius, nearly half the temperature of the sun's surface, and either holds or doesn't. On April 10th, 2026, 4 astronauts are inside that capsule. And at least one NASA engineer spent the previous 4 months trying to convince the agency that shield should never have been flying. He was there because he was invited.
NASA wanted to hear his concerns, show him the data, convince him he was wrong. But Camarda wasn't wrong. He knew he wasn't wrong. And the worst part? He'd been in that room before. Within weeks, 4 astronauts would launch toward the moon in a vehicle with a heat shield that had been documented as defective, a shield that lost over 100 large chunks on its last flight, a shield that, according to Camarda, nobody at NASA fully understood. Camarda left the meeting, wrote an open letter to the NASA administrator, and then watched live as the 4 astronauts launched anyway. What he saw in that conference room, and what happened before and after it, reveals something much bigger than an engineering problem.
Look, I know what you're thinking. The mission worked. The astronauts came home, and yes, they did. But that's not the end of the story. Because while the world watched the launch with that mix of pride and Apollo-era nostalgia, there was one man watching with his stomach in knots. Someone who understands heat shields better than almost anyone alive, and who spent months trying to make NASA stop. And what his story reveals about an organization that has already lost hundreds of people, and what happens to that memory when the schedule starts pressing.
3 things we're going to understand together in this video. How NASA knew about the problem since 2022. How they knew the Artemis II heat shield was defective and launched anyway. Why the one man with the credibility to stop the mission, an engineer who survived Columbia, spent months trying to be heard and was ignored every single time.
And what exactly the 31 heroes who gave their lives to get NASA here have to do with the decision that was made in April 2026? When the Orion capsule returned to Earth after the uncrewed Artemis I mission in December 2022, engineers found something they shouldn't have. The heat shield had cracked in places and lost entire chunks of material.
That was strange. Ablative shields are designed to melt. That's exactly how they transfer heat away from the capsule. But controlled melting is different from pieces breaking off. Scientists discovered the culprit was a pressure problem buried inside the shield itself. During re-entry, internal layers became scorching hot through a process called pyrolysis, trapping gas.
The outer layer hardened and became impermeable. On the second descent, the pressure had nowhere to go. NASA's Inspector General report revealed that over 100 large pieces had detached from the vehicle. 100 pieces, on a mission with no crew aboard.
The obvious question was, what happens when there are 4 people inside? Charles Camarda is not just any critic. He is one of the few human beings on the planet who flew to space specifically because a heat shield had failed. Camarda flew on the first space shuttle mission after the Columbia disaster, a mission designed in part to inspect the integrity of the shuttle's heat shield. He is an experienced thermal engineer with decades of NASA research behind him. When he saw the Artemis I reports, he recognized the pattern. Camarda criticized NASA's approach, arguing it mirrored the flawed methodologies that led to the Challenger and Columbia tragedies. He stressed the need for a research-based approach to understand the physics of the problem. A lot of the engineers are afraid to speak up, and that's a serious problem, he said.
But Camarda wasn't alone. Former astronaut Danny Olivas, a member of an independent review team, initially described the shield as deviant,
not what NASA would want protecting its astronauts.
Camarda told CNN he had spent months trying to get NASA leadership to heed his warnings. Months, not days, months. The fix that wasn't really a fix. NASA had a problem and needed an answer. The answer they chose was elegant on paper. Instead of redesigning the shield, they would change the re-entry trajectory.
To address the problem before the crewed Artemis II mission, NASA engineers opted to modify Orion's skip entry trajectory rather than altering the heat shield design. This, in theory, would allow the outer layer to breathe during re-entry, preventing gas buildup and cracking. In theory. The steeper, hotter trajectory also gave the capsule less range to maneuver away from bad weather near the Pacific splashdown zone. And there was another detail that Victor Glover, one of the astronauts, was honest enough to acknowledge publicly. The heat shield and parachutes are systems with zero fault tolerance built in.
Zero tolerance, no redundancy, no plan B. Dr. Charles Camarda had publicly warned that NASA didn't fully understand the root cause of the cracking, and that the modified trajectory amounted to playing Russian roulette. In January 2026, new NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman called a long meeting. He invited engineers, program leaders, and outside experts. He invited Camarda too. Some participants who had previously expressed concerns said the additional data answered their questions. Others continued to oppose flying without a redesigned shield. Camarda was in the second group.
After being invited to review NASA's investigation in January, Camarda wrote an open letter to Administrator Isaacman condemning the agency's decision. He believes the same NASA culture that produced the shuttle disasters led to the wrong launch decision. And here's the pivot. NASA listened to Camarda, reviewed the data, consulted experts,
Ran tests, and then decided to fly anyway. This is not the same story as Columbia. It's not a blanket of silence, suppressed data, warnings buried in drawers. It's something more complicated, and in some ways more disturbing. An organization that heard the warning, weighed the risk, and placed the bet.
In January 2026, Administrator Isaacman stated he supported proceeding with the mission using the existing heat shield after reviewing the agency's analysis and meeting with engineers and outside experts. On April 1, 2026, Artemis II launched. Now we need to talk about the 3-1. The title of this video is not a metaphor, it's a count. 3 astronauts died in the Apollo 1 fire in January 1967. Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. They died during a pre-launch rehearsal when fire broke out inside the cabin. Their deaths forced NASA to completely redesign the Apollo capsule and overhaul its entire safety culture. 7 astronauts died on Challenger in 1986. All 7 crew members were killed instantly. The investigation revealed that engineers at Morton Thiokol had warned about the O-ring seals in cold temperatures. Their warnings were ignored. The launch proceeded. 7 astronauts died on Columbia in 2003.
The Columbia Accident Investigation Board determined that beyond the physical damage to the spacecraft, NASA's management culture and its refusal to take a closer look at the damaged orbiter was partly responsible for the disaster. That's 17.
But the count of 31 includes the dozens of others, test pilots, flight engineers, training crews, whose deaths across decades shaped every safety system, every protocol, every checklist that exists today. Through a systemic lack of foresight and an unwillingness to challenge leadership, Columbia's destruction emerged from a series of small, seemingly innocuous decisions. It shockingly highlights the catastrophic potential of normalized deviance and of suppressed critical thinking, regardless of an organization's capabilities. Normalized deviance. That's the technical term. It's when an organization starts accepting abnormal behavior as normal, simply because it hasn't resulted in catastrophe yet.
Columbia flew 17 missions with foam breaking off the external tank and striking the orbiter. 17 missions. And because none of them ended in disaster, the foam was reclassified from problem to characteristic. The Artemis I shield lost over 100 pieces. And because the astronauts came home safely, because there were no astronauts aboard, the problem was reclassified from existential threat to manageable risk. Camarda had seen this before. Not metaphorically, he literally lived this story. And that's why he wrote that letter. And that's why you, watching this video, need to understand what was really at stake on April 1st, 2026.
It wasn't just 4 astronauts. It was the question of whether NASA had learned anything at all. At 8:07 p.m. on April 10, 2026, the Orion capsule splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. Navy divers opened the hatch and found 4 smiling astronauts. The shield held. The modified trajectory worked. Camarda was wrong, this time.
NASA's initial review raised no major concerns about the heat shield's performance, and Jared Isaacman, who staked the mission on that analysis, was vindicated. But here's the thing about placing a bet and winning. Winning doesn't mean it was the right bet to make. It means you got lucky this time.
NASA has stated that design changes to address Avacoat permeability are planned for the Artemis III heat shield. Wait, if the design was good enough for Artemis II, why is it being redesigned for Artemis III? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer.
The 31 who died before Artemis II, in fires, in explosions, in atmospheric disintegrations, died building a body of knowledge about what happens when you normalize deviance, when you silence engineers who want to speak, when you decide that no catastrophe yet means safe. Charles Camarda remains convinced the decision was wrong.
And NASA is still planning to redesign that shield. Maybe they're both right. The redesigned shield for Artemis III has never flown on an uncrewed test, never survived a real re-entry. Artemis III will land astronauts on the surface of the Moon and bring them back through that same atmosphere at 39,000 kilometers per hour with a shield that exists only in laboratory tests.
Nobody knows yet what happens when it meets real plasma. But if the past is any guide, someone is already trying to warn us. If you made it this far, you already understand why this story matters. It's not about NASA. It's not about a heat shield. It's about what happens when an institution stops listening to the people who know the most and starts confusing luck with competence. If this video made you think differently about what safety really means, not just in space, but anywhere experts try to speak up and nobody wants to listen, hit like.
Because this kind of story needs to reach more people.